Hello everyone. Um, so by the time you're watching this video, you'll probably have heard the news from North Korea. There's two big stories circulating at the moment, sort of dominating world headlines. The first was the Pope's abdication, um, and I may make another video about that, first in 600 years. That's a big story. But the other major story, sort of dominating world news right now, is North Korea's third confirmed nuclear test. Initial reports came through that there'd been an earthquake on the Korean peninsula. Well, it's well known that that particular region doesn't experience major earthquakes. Um, so it was speculated this pretty much was the nuclear test that the North had threatened to carry out. Um, it seems to have been quite a small nuclear bomb as they go, but a nuclear bomb is still a nuclear bomb. Um, and there's a lot of sort of angles to take with this. For just 1 second, I'm not going to talk about the nuclear issue. Let's just imagine North Korea is just another dictatorship. Um, the reason I say that, just another, is because North Korea is, in my opinion, the worst of the worst, but it's also absolutely unique. But let's just talk for a second about the fact that it is um, a dictatorship. There's a personality cult there that is absolutely. I haven't really seen that anywhere else in the world on that level in contemporary times. Um, in Thailand, there's a bit of sycophantic worship of the king there, and I've got strong views on some of the laws Thailand has, but nevertheless, it's an open nation by comparison. And well, there's no comparison, and there's no comparison with anywhere else on earth. Um, yes, there are other brutal dictatorships, and I don't want to trivialize those. We know what's happening in Syria right now. It's devastating there. And I could quote any number of dictators in Belarus. There's Alexander Lukashenko. In Chad, Idris Deby. Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe. There's still plenty of dictators around. Thankfully, some of them have been removed by Arab Spring, but there's still dictators around. The difference is, in most of those countries, people know they're brutal dictators, and there are opposition movements. Yes, they may be suppressed, but there are opposition movements, and whilst those regimes certainly try their best to brainwash people, I think the events of Arab Spring has really set an important precedent around the world for people questioning their own tyrannies and existing tyrannies or existing authoritarian regimes, let's put it. Some of them are seeing what's happening and reforming themselves. Burma's an example. A few years ago, it would have been one of the very worst. It's still far from, it'd be wrong to classify Burma as a good place to live, but it is. Things are changing there. As for China, well, I can make lots of videos about China, but that's the important thing to note about that is whilst it is an authoritarian one-party government, there is no cult of personality today. It's absolutely not Maoist in its sort of approach. It's collective leadership, and that's where the emphasis is. Xi Jinping is just a president. He's a very powerful president, but there's no cult of personality around him. If you go to China, which I will be very soon, you won't see mugs with Xi Jinping, you won't see posters, you won't see propaganda slogans specifically about him. About the party, yes, but not about him. And that's significant, actually. That's very significant and progressive in a country like China, which, given the history with Mao Zedong and so on. So China is a rapidly changing country, and it's a lot more open than it used to be. North Korea is absolutely in a league of its own, on the grounds that it's the world's biggest prison, and pretty much everyone there is brainwashed, except for the establishment, who are probably insane. The only North Koreans, and this is the absolute truth, who I have seen outside North Korea have been refugees and severe critics of the regime. Um, Whereas you can get other tyrannies where people have left those tyrannies and in some cases apologize for it. North Korea is unique in every sense. Um, it's a very poor country, but needless to say, its military is massive. I don't know what their actual military capabilities are. I'm talking about outside the nuclear issue. I know they have a massive manpower, something like 2 million standing army, and reserve force of 9 million. It amounts to almost half the population. Um, just to put this regime in context, in the 1990s, when there was devastating famine going on there, the Kim dynasty believed it was more important to demonstrate military might than feed starving citizens. By some accounts, as many as 3 million people perished in that famine. Food shortage is still a problem. Natural disasters occur all the time, flooding. No one ever knows how many people die for sure. Could be anything from hundreds to thousands. There are political prisons, gulags, Stalin-style gulags. I believe the largest Hamhong has up to 20,000 inmates. But you know, the thing about North Korea is it's very, very hard to verify anything. Um, so then the question is, how do we know it's so brutal? The answer is there's several angles to take. Number one, if the regime isn't as evil as it comes across, then they would have nothing to hide. They wouldn't hide that. When someone hides something, it's because, or when someone censors something, it's because they are hiding something. The North Korean regime is incredibly secretive because my theory is they don't want their people to see the outside world, even China. They don't want their people to see what the real world is like. North Korea is a fantasy land. It's it's really like no other place on earth. And that probably just sounds extremely obvious. But the reason I keep saying that is because I've actually seen people, and this really pisses me off, whose bias against the United States is so strong that they will go out of their way to actually defend the regime in North Korea as a way to get at the US. Now, if you're someone who's very critical of American foreign policy, that's fine. But I find it quite sickening that anyone can dare compare the United States, or any other democratic country for that matter, with North Korea. That is a perverse distortion. It's just an utter. It's not even worth entertaining. Um, no one would dispute America has huge problems, ranging from gun violence to issues with Guantanamo. There's a lot of issues. But to actually compare it to North Korea is the only way to describe that is perverse. And I believe it comes from people who just basically hate America. They're happy to use YouTube, but they hate America. Um, it's North Korea. To put things in context, I've had Chinese people tell me that they think the North Koreans are brainwashed. Now, what does that tell you when people from an authoritarian one-party state like China even recognize how god-awful North Korea is? And to be fair to China, it's reforming all the time. But my point is, China's hardly got a glittering track record on human rights. By comparison, China looks like Sweden. That's how bad I believe North Korea is. And people, this is one thing where, there's some debates in the world where there are sort of two sides. But on North Korea, pretty much everyone agrees. And actually, I've seen an interesting debate recently where Chinese statesmen and Chinese diplomats have got a little bit irritated at being repeatedly called North Korea's only ally. That's an understandable phrase because they have used the expression "we're as close as teeth and lips" before, and China does give North Korea has got substantial trade with North Korea. But after this test, I understand the Chinese embassy, oh sorry, the North Korean ambassador was recalled by the Chinese. Now, when an ambassador is recalled, that's a serious matter, and it doesn't happen between allies. I think, from my perspective, China's fed up with North Korea. China is somewhat embarrassed by them, and frustrated. I think they feel somewhat betrayed because I think, Ch- I mean, the pressure on China is enormous at the moment because they really are, in some ways, a lot more significant than the US. The US is going to oppose North Korea, that's obvious. China, there will be, I think, pressure from other members of the Security Council on China to be even more vocal. And to be fair to China, they did automatically condemn the test. And I think Xi Jinping, my impression so far is he seems pragmatic, he seems intelligent, he seems pragmatic, and I think he will recognize that nobody wants North Korea to possess nuclear weapons. This is an insane regime that is basically sees the entire world as enemies. I don't think they even trust China. Um, Japan and South Korea certainly have stakes to be concerned, but so does China, because the risk that China could face is an unstable Korean peninsula could ultimately result in lots of refugees in China from the north. Um, they also fear American military presence in the region. But for what it's worth, I hope in the coming years there could be better relations between America and China because they are the two world's superpowers at the moment. I think China is almost at a stage now where it can be called a superpower. Um, and there's another issue I'd like to raise. A lot of people, when these sort of things happen, say, oh, well, this is hypocritical. America has weapons, Britain has weapons, China has weapons, etc. That's an incredibly naive notion. It's pretty much it's a childish notion of they have what we don't have, let's take it. If you really want to go down that line, then you can argue every country in the world deserves nuclear weapons. Um, Whatever the rights and wrongs of nuclear weapons, the fact is they exist, and only a select number of very powerful countries have them. 7 countries, I believe. But the critical thing is, none of those countries that have them have used them in modern times. And there's only ever been one example of them being used, which was, of course, the United States on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And in my opinion, that is not a clear-cut black and white situation. World War II had to end. But the United States has never used nuclear weapons since then in an act of warfare. They could have after 9/11, they didn't. So this notion that other countries are going to use their nuclear weapons, the deterrent factor, it makes that almost impossible. Because none of the other countries that have nuclear weapons, in my opinion, are insane enough to do it. I believe North Korea is quite possibly insane enough to go through with it. The A-bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki were in a specific context of ending World War II. If North Korea tests a weapon, it will be a preliminary action. And let's be clear about this, nuclear stockpiles from Russia and the United States, two biggest nuclear stockpile holders, are significantly reduced from the Cold War. This is a fact people seem to overlook. And both Obama and Dmitry Medvedev deserve credit for that. And Clinton and Bush, frankly, for reducing stockpiles. Um, Other countries have them, Britain, France, China, India, Pakistan. But the important thing is a lot of those countries, I can't quote exactly which ones, but the general trend for major powers has been towards nuclear non-proliferation. North Korea, and arguably Iran, want weapons, that's proliferation. And some say Israel has weapons as well. The point is, No one can argue rationally that it would be in anyone's interest for North Korea to have weapons. I'll go on to another video.